Mirëmbrëma miq, mirë se erdhët në programin Familja 7. Sonte të ftuarit tanë janë një çift nga Shtetet e Bashkuara të Amerikës, misionar për shumë vite në Indonezi. Fokusi i tyre ka qenë përkthimi i Biblës në gjuhët origjinale. Në zonat ku ata kanë qenë në Indonezi, banorët nuk kishin mundësinë të kishin një Bibël në gjuhën e tyre. U deshen vite përkthimi që Bibla, dhjata e re, të ishte në duart e shumë prej tyre. Jemi me çiftin Roger dhe Suzan Doriot, prindër të 5 fëmijëve. Mirë se na erdhët në studio.
Thank you. We're very glad to be here.
Shumë faleminderit dhe ne jemi shumë të kënaqur të kemi këtë mbrëmje për herë të parë në studio, për herë të parë në Shqipëri. Na tregoni pak për vitin e largët 1975, kur ju shkuat për herë të parë në Indonezi. Si kanë qenë ato kohë për ju dhe a kishte ndonjë të krishterë në ato vite në Indonezi, pra në zonat ku ju shkuat?
When we arrived in 1975, in the whole country of Indonesia, which is the 4th largest country in the world, there were a considerable amount of believers, quite a lot of believers. But we went to the easternmost part of Indonesia, which is the western half of New Guinea, Papua, Indonesia, and there are 270 different groups of people, different languages, and many of those people were not believers. And we went into the Nalca area, and we had colleagues from our mission who had worked previously to our coming there. And the first believer was baptized in 1974. So when we arrived in 1975, in this tribe of 10,000 people, there was only one believer.
And for you, Suzan?
Well, when I came to Indonesia, to the island of New Guinea, I was very surprised because it was better than I expected. I had heard many stories and seen many pictures, but the people were friendly to us.
Po si ju dërgoi Perëndia në Indonezi, pra? Si ju dërgoi Zoti atje? Roger, ti kishe mbaruar për inxhinieri, ndërsa Suzan për infermiere.
I grew up on a farm. We were very poor, but I did well in school, and so I went to college and studied engineering. And I went to the state of West Virginia and worked with the government there for several years. But then I began to believe that God wanted me in some type of full-time Christian work. So I quit my job and went back to theological school. And while I was in theological school, I heard a missionary speak in chapel about the great need for Bible translation many places in the world. And so from that point, I began to train for Bible translation. And after I met Suzan, then as we together tried to decide where God wanted us to go, we looked at many books, we looked at maps, we looked at information about where Bible translation was needed. And we saw that Indonesia was one place where there was a great need for Bible translation. And eventually we made the decision then to go to Indonesia.
Dhe ndërsa shkuat atje, nevoja më e madhe ishte për të pasur një Bibël, pra për të pasur fjalën e Zotit në gjuhë të ndryshme, në gjuhët e tyre, në zonën ku ju ishit. Kur nisi përkthimi i dhjatës së re dhe sa vite u desh për ta përfunduar?
When we went in 1975, of course, we did not know this language. It was a completely unwritten language before missionaries had gone into that area. So it took a while for us to understand, be able to use the language. It was approximately 1977 when I began to do translation of the New Testament using several people from the Nalca tribe. We would discuss together what I thought the translation should be. And then it took us until the year 2000 to actually finish the entire New Testament.
Po gjithashtu mund të na tregosh pak, sepse vitet e fundit keni qenë përfshirë dhe në përkthimin e Biblës në gjuhën e nënës, nëse mund të themi kështu, për shkak edhe të ekzistencës së dialekteve të ndryshme atje.
When we first began translation in the Nalca language, we used the traditional pattern that missionary translators had used for many years, where I was the main translator. I had learned their language, And so as I understood it, I made a first draft of the translation. And then I would talk with them and say, how does this sound? Can you understand this? And so forth. As our translation helpers gained some education later, we came to the place where they could translate from Indonesian into their own language. They were mother tongue translators, and then we would check the work that they had translated as a first draft. And this process of people from different language groups learning Indonesian, being trained in translation principles, and then translating back into their own language is very important because of the many, many languages that there are there in Indonesia.
Po, gjithashtu Zoti Rogers, me kë keni bashkëpunuar ju me sa përkthyes për përkthimin e dhjatës së re?
We attended various seminars with Wycliffe Bible Translators, which is the biggest organization worldwide that does Bible translation. We had previously studied linguistics at the Summer Institute of Linguistics in Oklahoma University in the States, but then as we were on the field working in translation, sometimes there would be seminars and we could attend those to improve our understanding of procedures to translate. We also collaborated with various people who came in as consultants to check our work.
Po. Gjatë kohës që ju merreshit me përkthimin e Biblës, a bënit edhe, realizonit edhe takime kishtare atje, mund të më tregoni pak më shumë për gjitha takimet që bënit me banorët e zonës atje?
Well, at first, our first church, there was only one church at first. People came from villages. They had to walk quite a ways, maybe a couple hours to the church service. And so we had like 400 people in the one church building when it was new. But later, they had churches in every village.
Yes, our goal when we went there was to do Bible translation, but also to do church planting. And our goal was to eventually have a church in every village. The Nalca people live in an area about 1,000 square miles. There's 60 different villages. And so as Suzan mentioned, initially when the first believers were baptized from different villages nearby, we had one church, but then as more believers were baptized, then eventually there were churches in all these different villages.
Por në fillimet tuaja të para si u pritën njerëzit atje? Në një vend të ri, të panjohur, në një vend me kulturë, me zakone të ndryshme, ndoshta edhe vende të varfra.
When we went to enter the Nalca tribe, worked with the Nalca people in 1975, missionaries had already been there for some years, so they knew that we were coming to help them, and so we had a really, really good reception. They understood that we were going to do translation, and then they knew also that Suzan was a nurse and she was going to give them medical help. They had no medical help. Mm-hmm. The government at that time was not in the area at all. There were no schools, there was no medical work. So they were very glad to see us. When the first missionaries came, it was a little different. The people were suspicious and well, it was difficult to communicate and everything, but eventually they saw too that the people were there to help them, and generally the missionaries had a very good reception in this area.
A mund të më tregoni pak të dy për atë momentin kur pas 20 vitesh përkthim të Biblës, të dhjatës së re, njerëzit në atë zonë arritën të kishin kopje të Biblës në duart e tyre?
This is something they had waited for a long time. And now it was really happening. The Bibles came all wrapped in great big packages, all ready to be mailed, and they were mailed on little Cessna airplane, and it came in, and they all gathered round. They did their tribal dancing, and they did singing, and they did praying, and they blessed the God of heaven and said thank you. it was an exciting time for all of them, all the people, all ages, everybody gathered for this celebration.
Yes, it was very emotional time for many of the people there, although it was not as if they had no Bible at all and then all at once they had the Bible. Because as we translated through the years, we would print out portions of the scriptures and give that to the pastors especially and to some of the people to use and read. So they did have more and more parts of the Bible, but this was the time when they actually had a book that they could hold in their hand as their own. And it was very emotional for them and for us.
Dhe në gjithë të vite shërbes, sa ka ndryshuar, pra sa ndryshoi zona ku ju ishit, Papua në Indonezi? Besoj që ka besimtarë të shumt, edhe që janë tetur për fjalën e Zotit.
When we first came into the Nalca area, even though missionaries had preceded us and done some work for almost 10 years, very few of the people there had ever been away from their own area, out to the coast. They'd never seen a city, they'd never seen a car or anything like this. They lived in their grass-roofed huts. But as we worked with them in giving them the Bible, but we also helped them in economic development and other areas. Some of their people went to the city, they learned some things and came back. And so by this time, when we had the New Testament, the people were advanced in various ways. They had better food to eat, they had better houses, and many of the people had been to school out on the coast and knew Indonesian. And eventually, as the gospel was, they learned to read it, and some of them became evangelists and went to other villages. Now at this point, there are churches in all 60 villages in the Nalca area there. Oh. About over 8,000 baptized believers.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would like to add something, and that is their health was much different. At first, the little tiny kids are supposed to have black hair, but their hair was a reddish black, a dark reddish color, and their bellies were sticking out like this from worms and from malaria.
Malnutrition.
And malnutrition. And so it was very sad how sickly they were. And in spite of that, they were still strong to climb the mountains, to go up and to come down, because they had to go to get their food from their gardens. So now when we go, we're like, where are the little children with the big bellies? No, they all look very nice, and they have clothes on, and they have good food to eat, because they learned that what they have is better than they thought. And besides just eating sweet potatoes, you should also eat the greens from the sweet potatoes. That's just one example.
And different vegetables. We introduced various vegetables into the area too, to give them a better diet.
Po. Gjithë to vite në Indonezi, pra duke shkuar, duke u kthyer prapë në Amerikë, pra keni shërbyer gjithsesi për një kohë të gjatë. Disa nga fëmijët tuaj kanë lindur atje, 3 nga 5 fëmijët tuaj. A mund të më tregoni si e keni parë dorën e Zotit të veprojë në jetën tuaj? Keni ndonjë dëshmi?
Well, I think we have seen God really work in many, many ways. In the Western New Guinea there, malaria is very prevalent. I myself actually had malaria 10 or so different times and recovered from that. We had medications to help us. I've had dengue fever, I've had hepatitis. Suzan has had malaria a couple times. She's had typhoid fever, but the Lord has taken care of us. He's through medication and prayer, He's healed us, and we've been able to live to this age, working there in an area where it's very, very poor situation in many cases. Also, we have worked there as missionaries, and we are supported by various churches and individuals who want to help with work like this. We have no foundation that provides our funds, no regular salary from any place else, but the Lord has always provided for us, putting on the hearts of people to give so that we had enough to carry on our work there. And just in a lot of different ways, the Lord has really helped us through these years. Do you have anything else, Suzanne?
Well, we've had some emergencies that came up and quite shocking. And one was when Roger was trekking, and he was trekking with like 10 people, and they were going around the side of a mountain, and these mountains had steep crevices or steep cuts in the mountain where the water went down.
Small streams.
And they were crossing over, so that's fine, very good. But there was one time when Roger slipped and was falling, and one of his friends said, "Oh Lord, help him!" And his foot caught on a rock. That was what happened to him. But what happened to me and my 3 children at home at the same time was that 2 little children were in the bathroom washing their hands on a stool for one, and I don't know what the other one was doing, and I was taking care of the other child, getting them ready for night. And when I was done with the oldest child, I went into the bathroom and found the older child was washing his hands, but he was looking at his little brother who was upside down in our diaper pail, which had lots of water in it, and his head was underwater. So I grabbed him out and slapped him on the back like a newborn baby. And then after that, he was okay, except he had a cough. And I just thank the Lord for sparing my child.
Është kaq bekim të dëgjoja nga ju, edhe që keni një zemër për Zotin e pavarësisht moshës, ju po vazhdoni që të shkoni atje dhe të shërbeni. Ju uroj jetë të gjatë dhe shumë faleminderit që ishit me ne këtë mbrëmje.
Well, thank you. We're very glad to be able to share what God has done and our experiences there in Indonesia.
I really appreciate it.
Faleminderit, ndërkohë miq mos u largoni, rikthehemi pas pak në studio me të tjerë të ftuar.